Hello, my name is Monica Price and welcome to my show. On today's show, we have the legendary guitarist Jeff "Skunk" Baxter, who has a long and hugely successful career in the music business, known especially for his time in the rock band Steely Dan, where he was one of the founding members. And then he went on to play with the Doobie Brothers. Welcome to the show.
Good afternoon, Monica.
Wonderful to see you. Thank you so much for joining me.
It's my pleasure.
There's so much for us to talk about, of course, but you know, you were one of the founding members of Steely Dan, so maybe we should start there.
Your call.
We could go all the way back, of course.
Skunk is pawn in Game of Life. So,
So, you know, how did that all come about? I mean, you were born in Washington, weren't you? And then you moved to Mexico.
Moved to Mexico City, yeah.
And then you were playing the guitar and in bands from a very early age, weren't you?
That's true. Abraham Laboriel and I had a surf band called the Tarantulas. I was 11 and he was 12. And,
was that a lot of fun in Mexico?
well, actually, by accident, a friend of a friend of a friend of a friend who was an engineer up at Radio Éxito, which was a 50,000 watt radio station, and they played 4 hours of American rock every day. They asked us to come up and play. So we set up stuff and we played, and somebody cut a disc back in the days when they were cutting lacquer discs live, and they started playing it. So we started getting work.
Fantastic.
We were playing clubs. And at that time in Mexico, there was really no age limit for anything. So it was pretty cool. And then, this whole Steely Dan thing started. I was working in a studio in Boston. I was doing a lot of session work in Boston and commuting back and forth between Boston and New York. I was in a place called Intermedia Sound, and a gentleman named Gary Katz was producing a band called The Beat Game, and Gary eventually became the producer for Steely Dan. And he heard me doing a session. He says, listen, I've got these two songwriters. We're doing a record recording in New York for a woman named Linda Hoover. Would you work on the date? And I said, yeah, sure. So I went down there, and that's where I met Walter Becker and Donald Fagen, and they were writing the majority of the material. So after we were finished, they said, well, I've never really heard anybody play guitar like that on our stuff. And I said, well, I've never really heard music like this. It's pretty amazing. So we made a sort of a deal, whoever passed go, first, whoever got the first deal wherever, would call everybody else. And we'd form a band. So Walter and Donald got a publishing deal with ABC Dunhill, and then called me, and then asked me if I knew a great drummer, Jimmy Hodder from the Beat Game, and Gary knew him well. Dave Palmer came in to sing, and then they brought Denny Diaz, a wonderful guitar player. So that was it. We weren't sure whether to call it Steely Dan or Big Nardo in the 8th grade, but the problem was we thought Big Nardo in the 8th grade was too much to fit on the album covers. Was
that a mutual decision to call it Steely Dan, to call yourself Steely Dan?
Well, we were a bunch of little snots, we're all East Coast educated kids, The school I went to had some very interesting exchange students from Eton and Uppingham.
That's because you went to a British academy, didn't you?
Well, in Mexico City, I went to Greengate School, which was the British Embassy School, Then we had, when I went to Taft in Connecticut with a prep school, we had exchange students from what they call public schools, what we call private schools.
Yes, yeah.
And the literature that we were reading at that time was Henry Miller and William Burroughs and the whole sort of counterculture authorship. So the name Steely Dan came from a William Burroughs novel called Naked Lunch. So.
And a great name it was too.
Yeah, I think people confused us sometimes. They thought we were a country band, but
I can see that. But no.
It took about 3 seconds for them to figure that it was not what that was.
But you've been playing the guitar for so long, haven't you, Jeff?
Since I was 9.
And it continues now, of course, and we're going to be talking about your new solo album, your first solo album, a bit later on. But when you first joined Steely Dan, did you realise how big as a band they were going to be?
They were just kids. We didn't know.
How old were you?
I would be 20,
20s, yeah.
Something like
that. So very young.
We were just kids.
Yeah, very young.
We didn't know what we were doing.
But of course, you went on to, you travelled the world and continued to do so, didn't you?
Well, it was a wonderful opportunity to play great music. And then between that and all the session work, which led me to travel with other bands and have other musical experience. It's just been a great ride.
Yeah, and actually I found out the other day, is it true that you were the guitarist on Dolly Parton's 9 till 5?
Yes, ma'am.
Ah, one of my favourite tunes.
It's one of those things where you get the call.
Yeah.
Say, okay, I'll fit that in between Barbra Streisand and Leo Sayer. Okay. And one of the great experiences, talk about an angel, just an incredible human being.
Yes.
She baked cookies and brought them to the set.
How
We were
lovely.
in love. I'd do anything for her.
But she's a lovely musician, though, isn't she? And she's a businesswoman
A very
as well.
deep musician. That woman can cover a lot of ground.
Yes.
Very, very, very deep player as well as singer and writer.
So as a session musician yourself, you got to play with so many different bands, artists.
That's true.
Was there a favourite one for you?
You think back, and being a studio musician is kind of weird in a way because you have to have a lot of patience. You have extreme confidence, maybe up to the point where being just a little snotty. And you also have to be prepared to take a lot of crap. Dolly was just the opposite. Everything that she did and then working with her was so sweet, so wonderful, and so perfect. And she was so involved. Being a studio musician, I think, is an excellent career if you can do it. It's a lot of competition. It does a couple of things. One, it forces you to stay on the cutting edge of your music and as a player and as a craftsman. And number two, back in the days, certainly in the 60s and 70s and the 80s, a lot of my contemporaries were getting a little, how shall we say, off
Worse
the point.
for wear,
Yeah,
you'd
right.
say.
A
Worse
little
for
more
wear.
recreational than probably they should have. But being a studio musician meant that you had to show up. You were there at 9 o'clock, downbeat 9:30, and if you didn't play it right the first time, you were fired. There were 2,000 people waiting for that seat.
That's a very good point, because it makes you quite regimented, doesn't it? And
Well, it makes you regimented, and it also makes you respect yourself a little bit in terms of taking a little bit better care of yourself. Now, that's not to say that I didn't party hardy, but there was always a limit to me because I did not want to screw up my ability to be able to be like one of the, I guess it was one of the first call studio guys.
yes, yeah. And are you still doing that now?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And
Sure.
is it something you'll continue to do, do you think?
Until, I dropped dead. I was doing gigs with Les Paul until he passed away at age 94, and he was unstoppable. I mean, he was in a car accident, and so he said, "Set my arm like this." Absolutely.
Really?
Oh yeah.
Oh my gosh.
I'm just going to keep playing guitar. I mean, I don't care. So that whole attitude of of being a craftsman, being as good at your craft as you can.
Do you think the musicians that are coming through the ranks now have the same kind of work ethic as perhaps you did and your peers?
I'm not sure because, again, the whole studio thing is a very different genre. That's not to say that a lot of men and women, boys and girls, spend a lot of time shedding and trying to hone their craft. But I think it was a bit different. There's not a lot of studio work now because most musicians work either via computer and cut the tracks themselves. So I would say the dynamic is slightly different, but I've heard some wonderful players and wonderful musicians. So obviously they're putting the time and effort in.
Yes, absolutely. And then, of course, from there, from the Steely Dan, you went on to join the Doobie Brothers.
That's correct.
Now, you were actually in the same band at the same time, weren't you?
I was actually in the Doobie Brothers, Steely Dan, and Linda
Steely,
Ronstadt.
yeah. Because you didn't have anything else to do, Jeff.
Well, I like working.
Why not? So you were in that Steely Dan, and then you went to the Doobie Brothers. But was it true you got the call at Nebworth? You're actually in the UK
That's correct.
when you got the call.
That's correct.
So tell us about that.
Well, it was just we had finished a show at Nebworth, and I got a call from one of the guys at Steely Dan said he didn't want to tour anymore. Thought, well, that didn't sound like much fun because I really enjoy playing live. So I hung up the phone and said, yeah, I guess that's kind of it for me and Steely Dan. And one of the guys in Doobie Brothers said, well, you're in the Doobie Brothers now.
Yeah, and that was that.
That works.
And that was that. And you're still in contact, obviously, with with your
Matter of fact, I did a show with Mike McDonald last weekend.
Wow.
It's just it's a continuum of friendship and music.
And is that going to stay with you? Because we're going to be talking about your new solo album, as I've said. And do you see that kind of collaboration still continuing throughout your career?
That's one of the reasons why Michael's on the record. He offered to do it. And again, it was going to be an instrumental album.
Oh, was it?
Apache
Really?
and all that kind of stuff.
Yes, yeah.
And then when he asked me what I was doing, we were doing a charity gig up in Santa Barbara. Yeah. I said, well, I'm doing this solo project. He said, well, if you'd like me to do something on it. So I think it took me one femtosecond to go, yep.
Yeah, that's it. And where did you, was there anywhere unusual that you did a gig? Did you ever do a gig in the White House, for example?
Yes.
Wow.
Absolutely.
Which presidency, can we ask?
I think it was President Bush, and it was with a gentleman named Tony Snow, who was a Fox Network personnel, was Fox Network reporter. And I was doing a national security show with him, sometimes on Sundays.
Yeah.
And we had a band called the Coalition of the Willing. It was the drummer, who was the ambassador to Japan, guitar player, the ambassador from Hungary, other guitar player, deputy director of the Department of Energy. The bass player was the undersecretary of state for military affairs. Yeah, it was a wacky band.
It's a wacky band. This is.
So sure, let's go to the White House.
Yeah, why not? Yeah. Right, we're going to have to stop you just there. We've got to take a quick break, but come back and join me again just after the break. Welcome back to the Monica Price Show. I'm here with Jeff Skunk Baxter, and we've been talking about your incredible career, Jeff, with Steely Dan, Doobie Brothers. There's so many more we could talk about, but I want to talk about your brand new solo album. Now, this is your first solo album.
That's correct.
Released in June this year, called The Speed of Heat.
Yes.
So first of all, I want to talk about the title. How did you get the title of this album?
Well, my partner and music partner, who is just a fabulous musician in his own right, C.J. Vanston, keyboard player, producer, writer. He's an aviation buff, and much of the work that I do in my day job has to do with things that go fast and aviation and stuff. So the working title of the record was Speed of Heat, which is an aerodynamic, thermodynamic term that describes the phenomena that happens when you move through the atmosphere approaching Mach 1, the speed of sound. So we used that as the working title. So the president of the record company said, well, I love the title of the record. I said, what's the title of the record? Speed of Heat. I went, okay, do you know what that is? He said, no, but I don't care because I really like it. So just for the heck of it, if you look on the cover, the album cover, you'll see behind me, there are a number of sets of equations. And so about 4 months ago, I got a call from one of my colleagues at Northrop Grumman. I said, Skunk, I know what you're doing. I said, what is that? Those are oblong pressure wave equations, right? I said, yep, you're absolutely right. So Speed of Heat has a number of different connotations, and we thought, yeah, sure, why not?
It's a good name.
Yeah, we like it.
You must be very proud of this album.
You know, I am, and obviously, pride is a mortal sin, or certainly hubris, but I am very proud of it because I had not done a solo album. I was kind of, I always felt that when you leave a successful band or bands, immediately doing a solo album doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Besides, I was pretty busy. I had session work on the producing and stuff and the day job. Was
it something on your bucket list almost? It's
really the last thing pretty much, musically anyway. And I got to do two things on this record. One was I got to play with some of my favorite folks.
Yes,
Mike McDonald.
Yeah.
Clint Black, who's a big Steely Dan fan, incredible musician. And Johnny Lang, Rick Livingston. Again, the idea being you come and play with myself and CJ and write, and we do something that is so far out of your wheelhouse that we're going to explore some stuff. And it actually worked out pretty well. And the other thing I wanted to do was, I love pedal steel. I think it's one of the most beautiful instruments, the most beautiful instrument. And I wanted to do an a cappella piece on pedal steel because I wanted people to hear the voice. And many years ago, when I was on the board of advisors for Guitar Player magazine, we did a 25th anniversary show. Yeah. So they said, would you please come up with something to play while we honor, those who passed on. And I thought about it. I said, that's the melody of the rose. So I thought, okay, I'm just going to go out there and play by myself. So I got all the way through the first verse, and Adrian Belew came out. who's one of my favorite guitar players and a good friend, he plugged in and he started playing. And by the time I got to the end of the second verse, we had a whole band. I mean, everybody just come on out and play it. So I thought, number one, I want to perform it.
Yeah.
And number two, I wanted to do something that I attribute to my dad, because I don't know if I really have the words to say to him before he passed away how I really felt. So maybe this is the way to do it.
Absolutely. And it is an incredible album, Jeff. I've listened to it, and it's instrumental and vocal. In fact, your first vocal. Let's talk about that. Was because I know you did it as a kind of let's just sing and get the song done.
Vocal,
that's
so
right.
That someone else.
So let somebody else do it. Yes.
And so I sent it off to Steve Tyler.
Yeah.
And so Steve called me back and said, "Yeah, sure, I'll consider it. But who's singing this?" I went, "That's me. I'm just doing the scratch vocal." And he said, "Well, why don't you sing it?" "Steve, I'm not a singer. I'm in bands with people like Linda Ronstadt and Michael McDonald. It's not what I do." He said, "Well, sing it." "Are you, pulling my leg?" "No." And so, okay, well, I trust you. You're my friend. If you say I should do it, then I'll take a shot at it.
And that's on the track My Old School, isn't it?
Right, which I thought, I used to sing that when live in Steely Dan, and I thought there's a song that had a lot of energy potential that hadn't been realized yet. So myself and I wrote an arrangement for it and then worked that out with CJ. And we thought, okay, let's just go thermonuclear on this. Let's go Mach 1.
Great, I like that. Let's go Mach 1. See, there was so many, I love the fact the album is a very different, it's kind of an eclectic collection of rock, and then you've got something like Juliet, which is, I fell in love with that track.
I'm glad you love that song.
Almost within,
like I said, my daughter said,
I love
that's
it.
the sunshine, Daddy.
Sunrise. There's something about it. And of course, Apache, the other, you had to do that one.
I was such a Ventures fan, I was in their fan club.
Yes, and I mean there was other songs as well, because as you say, you've collaborated with the singers, and were they all kind of vying for your attention? Did you have a lot of people say, "I'd like to come and do this. I'd like to come and work with you"?
Well, if I do another record, which I'm certainly thinking about, I was very fortunate to have a number of folks certainly raise their hand and volunteer.
Yes. That must have made you feel very good.
Well, I'd love to have Adrian play on it because he was so inspirational for doing the Rose. And there are a bunch of folks who've stepped forward and said they'd like to do something. So,
and it's doing well, so that's good. It's had very, very good reviews.
Well, thank you. I know better than I just did the best I could.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to see another one then.
Probably, because I had so much fun doing this one.
Yeah, maybe next year.
Could be.
Yeah,
could be. I still have a lot of work to do, and stuff.
And you can put some more equations on the back of the label.
One of your countrymen actually was part of the inspiration for that. I don't know if you're familiar with Jane's Defense Weekly, the publication.
Yes.
Nick Cook, who was the former senior aviation editor for Jane's, and I became friends, and he had given me some information that had helped me later on in my day job, and we became friends. And so I thought of him when we thought it's called the record Speed of Heat. As I called him and said, "Nick."
I have to think about another good title for the next one now. Absolutely.
Send me some more information on the hunt for 0 Point.
Come on, you've heard it here. Now let's talk about your day job. Now you're a defence consultant, that's what you call yourself, and I know you can't give too much away, but a little synopsis perhaps, Jeff, of what you do. What's your involvement and how long have you been doing it?
Well, like I try to explain to most folks, a radar is just an electric guitar on steroids. Once you understand the physics of it, and you understand the physics of vibration, frequency, power generation, electromagnetics, and physics, it's pretty much the same. I think the areas that I work in that I can talk about are missile defense, space, satellites, and all the things that go together with that. Perception management, perception engineering, and wargaming is something that I do a lot of. I'm a red team person. I'm the bad guy.
You're the bad guy.
I'm the bad guy.
Ah.
So
that must be quite good fun.
Most of the time it is.
Yeah.
I mean, it's always fun to have the vice chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff say, "Damn it!" Sorry, boss. I'm just my job is to make your life miserable.
I'm the bad guy.
So that's my job. That's it. But I think one of the things that I bring to the table, if I bring something, is music and musicians, and the art of music requires nonlinear thinking. And then there's nothing wrong with linear thinking where you go from point A to point B to point C, et cetera. But non-linear thinking requires you to think on a number of different levels at the same time. I mean, if you look at music, tempo, time, which are actually slightly different, melody, chords, lyric, there's so many different things that are moving at the same time.
Layers almost, yeah.
So for me, what I tried to do, and what seems to have worked out well, is to bring that concept, that algorithm, if you will, to analysis in the intelligence community and in the Department of Defense to look at problems from a different perspective.
And how long have you been doing that, Jeff?
It's over 25 years.
Wow. And does everybody know about that? You know, because some people I've spoken to, they didn't realize you were doing that.
People think they do.
Yes.
And there are, there were, actually Wall Street Journal did an article some years ago on the front page. I thought, wow, my dad said, what the hell is going on? And I think most people do. And the good news is that there are some, really smart folks. Brian May just got his PhD in astrophysics.
Yes, absolutely.
Paul Reed Smith, the guitar maker who makes the guitars for Carlos Santana, called me up one day and said, Skunk, I got this underwater detection concept. Can you come down and look at it? So I went down and had a look at it, got on the phone, called Admiral Nevin Carr over at the Naval Research Lab and said, Nev, you got to see this. Next thing you know, he's got a company now called Digital Harmonic. That's Paul Rivera is doing work for the Air Force.
Great.
It turns out that after I sort of got into the game and people realized, at least I wasn't completely, completely nuts.
Yes.
That it made sense to reach out to some of these folks, like-minded folks like myself, and leverage their capabilities. And frankly, many of the physicists that I work with, Lawrence Livermore at MIT, Lincoln Labs, most of them are musicians.
Wow.
I mean, Edward Teller was a concert pianist.
Goodness.
Albert Einstein was a concert violinist.
Yes.
So, and Charlie Towns, the man that won the Nobel Prize for inventing the laser.
It's that creative mind.
Totally understood it. And I guess to give you an example of how all this melds together, most guitar players, if you strike an A string on a guitar, it vibrates at 440 times a second.
Yes.
Next harmonic is 880 times a second. Go up and up and up. But if you multiply 440 times 10 to the 23rd power, you know what the superharmonic is?
No.
Green. Because all you're talking about is just differences in frequency.
Yes.
Now, the human body has a sensor set. You feel low vibration, and then all of a sudden you can hear from 20 cycles to 20,000, then it disappears because your sensors don't have that capability. The next time you can sense it is when you start to feel heat. And that moves into the infrared, and then that moves into the visual spectrum.
This is another show.
Well, what I'm saying is that the way that all of this is connected, when Charlie Towns started talking about coherent oscillations, which is part of, a laser is basically just a single frequency with a very high amplitude. And he started talking about how you combine coherent oscillations. I said, Charlie, that's what music is. And went, you bet.
Fantastic.
So the relationships are very, very deep.
Well, it's been an absolute pleasure.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
To speak to you. Thank you so much for
you run
joining
a great
me.
shop here.
Thank you so much. Thank you. That's it for today's show. Thank you so much for watching. And of course, thank you to my wonderful guests. Please come back and see me again very soon and follow us on social media.